This is DevOps is Done, Deployment Strategies for 2019. So I would like to go ahead and introduce our main presenter today, Andrew Hallway. Andrew has been a DevOps engineer, a CTO, and now he is the founder of Otter Networks, where his team develops new methodologies for technology adoption, one of which we'll talk about today with productivity engineering.
So everybody, thanks very much for joining. So as Taryn just said, my name is Andrew Hallway, the founder of Otter Networks. So I've been working in infrastructure stuff for about 15 years, started in supercomputing type stuff, then went into Amazon Web Services, doing a lot of DevOps type stuff. And I had a bit of a career crisis last year, or maybe a year and a half ago, where I realized as a freelance DevOps engineer, throughout my career, I'd kind of delivered negative value. So I mapped out all of my projects that I've ever completed, and I kind of realized, or I kind of felt that for all of these projects, I kind of delivered more problems than I solved. And so I'm trying to change that. And so I'm here with Edmondo.
Hi, yeah, I am CTO and co-founder of Credimi, or Credimi, if you spell the English way. We are a digital lender. We are active in invoice financing. We are a big player in continental Europe. We've been giving loans for about 200 million last year. I have about 10 years of experience, and I've been moving from a senior backend career to this CTO career. So obviously DevOps and infrastructure, which in the past were more like someone else's concern, they became my concern as I jumped in this new role.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with Codefresh and what you're doing with Otter, what we're doing together?
Right. Yeah. So very few days after I joined Credimi, one of the first things I was looking for was a modern continuous integration CI/CD pipeline. Back at the time, there weren't too many players already active in the Docker space, and Codefresh was actually the one we liked the most among very few, honestly. And so we've been clients of Codefresh from since June 2016, and we always use Codefresh to build Docker images for our microservices, and we were just deploying them manually to production. So the last step was manual, which introduced some risks of wrong configuration, of developers undeploying the change someone else has just done, and we wanted to move to a complete, auditable and risk-free mechanism. So we wanted to have a full pipeline, and Andrew is helping us in transitioning to this full pipeline and embracing the GitOps philosophy.
Cool. So let's jump in into a little bit on how that's happening. So Otter Networks is basically offering what we call skill sprints. So Otter Networks is about technology adoption, and the way that we help companies adopt technology is through these skill sprints. And so we'll explain a little bit how that works. But first, let's talk about DevOps and what exactly we're doing for Credimi. So basically, this is the kind of the old world here. Let's get out the pointer right here. So basically, we've got some hardware here, and Amazon Web Services delivers to us this API right here. And a DevOps engineer can have some kind of some artifacts using tools like Terraform, Ansible, SaltStack. And the DevOps engineer can deploy infrastructure in Amazon Web Services to create some kind of layer which can then be consumed by a development team. It's typically very, very difficult and almost unreasonable to ask developers to try and consume this Amazon Web Services API. It's very, very difficult. It requires a lot of complex tooling, and they're pretty much busy full-time trying to deliver value to the business. And so this DevOps stuff typically gets siloed in this DevOps engineer role. And it becomes siloed because it's so complex, okay? And it often results in a lot of black boxes and funny plumbing and stuff like that, okay? And I think you're familiar with the black boxes and funny.
Yeah. At a certain moment, we decided we wanted to understand more of the black boxes, but it took me something like 50 hours of training to, you know, understand each single part of the offering of AWS and why we were doing it in a certain way and not in another way. It was a big investment in terms of know-how. I'm happy I did it because I learned something more, but obviously if I didn't have to do it, that would be even better.
So the new world looks something like this. So basically Kubernetes, so you still have the hardware on the left, but basically Kubernetes provides an end-to-end solution that can be directly consumed by developers. And so actually in Google, I mean, Kubernetes came out of Google a few years ago. It's an open source project that came out of Google. Google referred to everything between this line and this line as site reliability engineering, which is a distinct skill from DevOps engineering. So DevOps engineering is really about consuming this AWS API and trying to give something to the developers. But SRE and Kubernetes is about providing this end-to-end solution that can be directly consumed. And this pattern of providing services that can be directly consumed by developers is something that's sort of rolling out across cloud providers right now. So if you look at, for instance, the way that Amazon Web Services is built and the way that Google Cloud is built, for instance, you'll see that Google Cloud is much more developer friendly. It's built for developers, whereas Amazon Web Services is kind of built for DevOps engineers. Microsoft Azure is somewhere in between. So they started off with this model and they realized a few years ago that this model was probably the future. And so you need to be, so if you're putting together a product and if you want your development team to consume services, you need to be a little bit careful to make sure that those services have been designed for consumption directly by developers. And then you can avoid this trap of getting involved with DevOps engineering. And this is the transition that Credemy is making now, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you look to the Amazon offering, they are starting to deploy new type of services. I'm thinking, for example, about Aurora Serverless, right? But the large part of their offering is still in the old way of doing things. And you need definitely some understanding on how it works underneath to consume the services. While with Kubernetes, it's much, much easier, right? You don't need to understand what's happening underneath. That's provided by the driver Kubernetes is using for the cloud provider, but you are just, you know, it's just your screen card driver. You don't care, you just use it, right? And obviously this saves you time and money, which is precious.
So the point is that when you're using Kubernetes, this service has to be directly consumed by your developers. And this creates an increased cognitive load for your developers. This type of cognitive load, and let's talk a little bit about tacit knowledge. So basically tacit knowledge, as it's written here, is the kind of knowledge that's very difficult to transfer to another person by the means of writing it down or verbalizing it. So consuming Kubernetes is a technical skill that's similar to doing woodwork or working a lathe or welding, in that you have to feel these tools in your hands. You can do as much training as you like, so you can read as many books as you like, or you can speak to as many carpenters as you like, but you still can't build a table. And it's also true of Kubernetes as well. You can do a lot of training, you can read a lot of books, but that doesn't mean that you can utilize it effectively. I mean, finding the right patterns and finding the right best practices is incredibly difficult. And so as a development team, if you're trying to adopt a new technology, that means you're trying to adopt and find new tacit knowledge. And this is very, very difficult to build inside a team.
I mean, you can definitely try it, but you're gonna try to, you know, build a table and you have to fail so many times until you get the right table. And obviously if you get a senior carpenter, which is correcting you while you're building the table, then probably in a very few tries, you're gonna be able to build a good table. So it saves you a lot of time and money if you get someone else who is following you along while you're doing that activity.
I would strongly recommend that everybody spends a little bit of time. I mean, there's a really, really good Wikipedia article on tacit knowledge. Understand what it is. The IT industry is a knowledge industry, and technical knowledge is mostly tacit knowledge. But there's actually not very many people that are really thinking about, hey, this knowledge is an asset and how do I manage it? And so Otter Network spends a lot of time thinking of knowledge as an asset and how to manage that asset and how to invest in that asset. So if you want to share knowledge within a team, if you want to share tacit knowledge, there's a couple of ways, there's a couple of things you need to have to make that happen in an effective way. The most important is providing a high quality social interaction. This is and this makes a lot of sense if you think about the way that human beings were using tools in the very beginning. Even before we had speech and writing, you would learn how to use some tool together in a social situation. And our brains still work in the same way. Evolutionarily, we are geared towards learning this type of specific tool using tacit knowledge via social interactions. Also very important is ownership. Ownership is really, really so important. If you have a bunch of engineers and they don't feel ownership of these things, you're never going to get a very, very nice effect. Unless they feel like they really own it, the quality is never really going to be there, and the drive and the quality is never really going to be there. So what Otter Networks attempts to do is provide a high quality social interaction and then give ownership of this knowledge to the engineers that we work with. So training. So training is a very, very common way that people try and inject knowledge into a team. So here you have a trainer, and that trainer has some kind of training asset that he wants to try and deliver to the trainees, essentially. So this asset might be a Hello World application. It could be some example application. He'll show this example application to the students, and then they will try and make some kind of copy of this or some kind of interpretation of this object. So this asset that's owned by the trainer has a lot of value to the trainer. His value as a trainer is very, very much wrapped up in the value of this object. However, these objects that these trainees create, they don't necessarily have any value to the trainee or to anybody else. So I don't know how many people, if you've ever done any kind of technical training, you do the technical training, but it's very, very rare that you'd review your notes and go over. And these assets that you create tend to be discarded quite quickly, and they don't have any value to anybody else. And it seems that if these assets don't have any value, then how can they be owned? And so we at Otter Networks, when we work with a client, we work through a skill sprint. And during this skill sprint, we work directly with 1 or 2 developers, or maybe 3 developers, within a sprint. So we're working together in a room, and we're working together to deliver specific business value, so that the asset that we're using to train is actually the real asset of the business. And that's what we've done with, that's what's happened with Credemy. We've worked with 2 Credemy engineers, and we've basically re-engineered their whole CI/CD pipelines. And when I leave tomorrow, I mean, we're day 4 of day 5, when I leave tomorrow, these 2 engineers, and actually we did a session today with you as well, ownership is there, okay? And that's really, really important. And this is where we differentiate ourselves from being a training provider. So the forgetting curve. So people, you've probably seen this before, and it's a fairly well-known thing that when you learn something new, after a week, you maybe keep 10% retention of that thing. And it's very, very, very difficult to, get knowledge into your brain and make it stick. And this forgetting curve is mainly because you learn something and then you never really have an opportunity to review it at any point. But because we're delivering people this ownership and we're delivering actual production infrastructure, they don't have a choice. You have to look at it next week, and you have to continue looking at it. And so as a training exercise, it's incredibly powerful. And you also get business value, which is quite nice. So yeah, so these are these skill sprints, and we use these to transform infrastructure. So we want to do a little demo now. So review apps. And so this is something that we're delivering to, or enabling Credemy with, is the ability to deploy any branch using GitOps. And so this means that a developer can be working on a branch, and this branch is automatically deployed at the touch of a button. Like it just everything is deployed all the time. And this means that, well, we'll give a demonstration and we can see what this means. So let's try and get the terminal back, and then we can have a little demo. Okay, so let's do a git checkout master. We're still in the master, yeah. Okay. Okay. So I want to git checkout -b a branch. Let's call this the Codefresh demo right here. Okay, and we want to make a little change. So we can v includes home hero.html. We'll just make a little change here. My Vim is still very, very poor. There we go. Let's just change this to hello webinar world. And so you can imagine this is a developer working on a new feature. Git commit -am. Hello. And then we can git push. Just need this one. Okay. So then we can make a pull request of this. Okay. So this is where Codefresh. So this is where we're get into some Codefresh into the Codefresh world, and so we can see. So we can see that we've, in response to the activity that we did here on Git, this is already starting to build. In fact, I need to open this in a new tab. Okay, this is normally building pretty quick. But anyway, there's always one I made. There's always one that we made earlier. So basically, where are we? So this is actually a live branch that we're using right now. So this is actually, we've actually been a bit slow. Funnily enough, this is to put in an article about this webinar, but we managed to get too busy and it didn't manage to get merged in time to get on the website, hilariously. But basically, we can see here that the build has passed. You can see this right here. So we can see the status of the build. And then most importantly, we can check what's changed. So at the click of a button from Git, we can easily launch what we call a review app. And so this is basically a snapshot of what the developer's working on right now. And then this can be viewed by the rest of the business, can be reviewed by the product owner, it can be reviewed by a customer. And so this is the kind of, this type of CI/CD or Codefresh enables us to do extremely advanced things and provide very, 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 very advanced environments for development, which can also deliver a lot of value to the business. So the development process can be often very, very opaque, and it's often very, very difficult for the business to see what's happening in the development process. And Otter Networks, we help the customer leverage Codefresh in order to provide better transparency into the development process for the business, for example. And people generally like this type of approach. It works very, very well. And then, well, this one should have finished by now. Where are we?
That's the wrong one. So you open it twice the same.
Okay, let me go back to my pull requests. Is this one hello, yeah? Show all the checks. And we can see that indeed this pull request environment, hello webinar world. And so it means that as a developer, we can show things to people incredibly quickly, and we're not having to show things on our laptop and stuff like that, which can get very, very irritating. And actually you can go to this link, codefreshdemo.otterly .otterly.cc, and you can have a look for yourself, and this is shareable to the world now.
Yeah, and obviously what Andrew did with us was, to apply this methodology to a more complex infrastructure. I know maybe you guys are thinking, oh yeah, but it's not very difficult. This is just one static website. But when you're starting to have a microservice architecture, and maybe you have 20 different or 50 different microservices.
How many do you have so far?
We probably have between 20 and 30, something like that.
Yeah, I think we've done 20 so far.
Right, something like that. So
in a week.
The thing is, whenever you are developing something new, you should test that coherently with the other version. And if you have a change that impacts two microservices, then you need to test these two updated microservices together. And developers typically start to fight if you have a QA instance, because I want to develop my change that needs version A and of these two microservices, and you want to deploy version B of the same microservice. And we won't be able to test. We will have a conflict, and we won't be able to test it. And obviously, this is going to slow down. But if each of us can basically rebuild the whole infrastructure on his own in a separate Kubernetes namespace, then no conflicts anymore, and obviously very, very few manual work, because it all happens automatically, which is
so very, very basically, Otter Networks is working with Credemy to make sure that each developer can easily get all of the resources that they need without any messing around. It just happens at the touch of a button.
Yeah, just commit something on Git, and it creates the whole infrastructure.
So let's go back to the rest of the presentation. I don't think there's very much left. Where are we? There's a present button. Okay, what else we got on here? So yeah, Codefresh. If you're not initiated into Codefresh, we're both fans. You've been using it for 2 years. It's extremely slick, and the reason why I like Codefresh is because it really is developed for developers. I mean, there's features just arrive before you even ask for them. It works very, very well, and it's very, very developer focused. It's very, very easy to consume. And as I mentioned before, developers now have a lot more to think about. And so people that provide services like Codefresh, they really have to think about, through good UI design, through good application design, how to make life easier for people. And Codefresh really does this, and they've been doing this for quite some time. And it's really, really clear by the quality of their software. It works incredibly well. So if you need a good CI/CD system, I mean, we're partnered with them. We deliver Codefresh to most of our customers. Can't recommend it more.
Andrew, if we could back up just a little bit, I have a couple questions that relate to this. First of all, I have a question on whether we could elaborate on the relationship between Kubernetes and container orchestration tools and DevOps pipelines, so CI and CD, and then how Codefresh fits into Kubernetes Docker environments.
Okay, so basically, if you want to, I can just show you actually, I think is, take a little bit of time. Basically, Codefresh integrates with Kubernetes incredibly easily. It's basically, Codefresh I think is the only CI/CD system that really properly integrates with Kubernetes. You don't really have to, I mean, if you're using Codefresh with Google Cloud, for instance, you don't have to take care of any secret rotation. You just connect them up and it just works, and you don't have to worry about it ever again. So Kubernetes is basically, how do I describe this? It enables you to deploy environments incredibly quickly, production environments, staging environments, test environments, but there's always a lot, if you're using other CI/CD systems, there's always a lot of pain about how do I handle these credentials, and sometimes you have to write a lot of bash scripting and other scripting. With Codefresh, it just works out of the box. In fact, I can probably just give you a quick glimpse. Codefresh.yaml. So basically, this is the Codefresh.yaml that we're using for the website, and this is it. So we're talking about, I don't know, maybe 150 lines, and this is it. There's nothing else required in order to make this work. Does that answer the question, Taryn?
Sure. If Gary or Dr. Hamwi, if you have any more questions, please feel free and enter them into the Q&A box if you have any specific questions, and we can get those answered for you. And everyone else as well, if you have any more questions, please enter them there.
Okay, cool. So skill sprints. So this is quickly what we do. As we've done for Credemy, we aim to deliver a CI/CD system integrated with Git and Kubernetes. To be clear, when we're doing this delivery, we're not. Otter Networks isn't touching a keyboard. All of the work is completed. Well, it's completed by you and by your engineers, and also by Matteo over here, who's. And so this is typically happening in a week, and this is really possible in a week because the technology is now so advanced. It's just a case of having the right knowledge and the right patterns and the right best practices, and it is really deliverable in a week. It's now with Kubernetes and with tools like Codefresh, if you know what you're doing, it's an order of magnitude less work than DevOps. And yeah, we've managed to do UE so far in a week. So the skill sprint. So typically it works with, we do a proof of concept. And this is just a few hours to make sure that your application fits into Kubernetes, to make sure that it's not using some ancient technology from 1978 and it can actually be deployed in Docker and deployed in Kubernetes. If your developers don't have any Kubernetes knowledge or any Docker knowledge, we'll stick them through a little bit of online training to make sure that when we start this skill sprint, they're able to hit the ground running and we're not spending days and days explaining the most basic concepts. With Credemy, this was very good because all of your developers are very familiar with the command line already, and it was very easy. And also then we provide a year of ongoing support via Slack. So the developers that have been through this training process, they're then free to contact us for a year with any problems they may have. So we provide help and support for a year. But this isn't generally needed, to be perfectly honest, because people have ownership and they can read the manuals, and it's generally not required, but it's there if you need it. So yeah, what do we have for questions then, Taryn?
I don't have any additional questions at the moment, so I want to remind everyone to enter their questions into the Q&A box. But if you have any common questions that you've come across, Andrew, maybe you could share some of those with us.
Do you have any questions?
In terms of what do you see happening next with Kubernetes? So what we see is that Kubernetes and the drivers, they basically ended up abstracting from a certain range of cloud services. And I'm thinking about storage, for example, persistent disk or cloud storage if you are in Google Cloud, load balancers. We still see the developers, for example, they need to provision their database through their own cloud provider. Do you see, for example, drivers coming for MySQL, and in that case, you will provision a resource, a custom resource in Kubernetes, and it will map to RDS or Google Cloud SQL?
Yeah. This is actually already possible. You can use a thing called operators, which enable you to do this. So you can actually write a little bit, you can actually extend the Kubernetes API a little bit with an operator. And so in your deployment YAMLs, you can then have a little stanza that then operates anything else that you want to operate. But actually, I think that Kubernetes is kind of the great leveler of cloud. So for some years, you had specifically Amazon Web Services and Azure basically competing and saying, well, our features are better than your features. Our cloud is better than your cloud. Our instances are somehow better than your instances. We've got this queue, this database. And everybody, and this also created a lot of vendor lock-in as well. So Amazon Web Services or Azure vendor lock-in, it's very, very difficult to migrate between clouds. It's almost impossible, actually. But with Kubernetes, it levels everything. It completely levels the playing field. It means that because it's a single open source framework, it means that it's very, very difficult now for clouds to differentiate. And they're going to have to come up with something incredibly good to top Kubernetes. And so this means, I think, that the cost of cloud computing is going to, Kubernetes already has very, very strong adoption, but once it really starts making it into the big enterprise, and I know in Germany there's a lot of very, very large enterprises that are already working on adopting Kubernetes. Once this happens, the cost of cloud computing is going to plummet. because everybody's going to be free. It's going to really be a commodity because people are going to be free to deploy wherever the hell they want to deploy without any friction. The only restriction from that right now is where do you keep your state? Where do you put your databases? Where do you put your queues? Where do you store your state? And at the moment, this is generally in the cloud provider services like RDS, the relational database service from Amazon Web Services, or various other databases like Mongo or whatever is available from the cloud. There's a lot of work happening, and I think last year, relational databases on Kubernetes matured. In the previous to last year, I would never recommend that any customer puts their database in Kubernetes. But now, I'm not so sure. I think it's like it's a thing that you can do. So, I mean, I could imagine very, very soon there's going to be a pure Kubernetes cloud provider that doesn't have any other services. All you get is Kubernetes, and you just deploy whatever databases you want in there. And I think that's going to be the future. I think that's the future of Kubernetes. Is that it's going to just...
Andrew, I do have a couple more questions. So we're talking a lot about Kubernetes. Can you talk a little bit about how Docker fits in?
Well, maybe you want to take this one.
Well, yeah, naturally, building your apps in containers is necessary if you want to have that kind of possibility to deploy everywhere. And Docker has emerged as the leading container solution. I know there are other, but
RKT, I think, is what
right.
I never remember.
It seems that Docker is a de facto standard. So
for all its flaws, it is the standard.
Right. And I'm assuming everybody who's building a new project right now is building as a Docker image.
I would imagine.
So I don't see the fact that you deploy only Docker images on Kubernetes a sort of limitation. I think there's also now Docker support for Windows, and you can build a Windows machine as well as Docker images. So I even see Microsoft's applications being run on Kubernetes. If not right now, although Azure has a good offering for Kubernetes, certainly it's gonna get there. There's no reason to.
But basically, Docker is just the fundamental underlying container technology of Kubernetes. So Docker enables you to run it's a virtualization technology more than anything else. It enables you to run multiple applications on the same piece of hardware or on the same virtual machine in an isolated environment with all of the dependencies in the container. All Kubernetes does is orchestrates all of that across many, many machines, essentially. So yeah, Docker is just the underlying containerization technology for Kubernetes. And I think Kubernetes wants to support other containerization technologies, but they're just not getting enough adoption in the market. They're not getting enough leverage.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you want to read more about Docker, basically what happened, I don't remember where exactly, but a change was introduced in Linux kernel around 2007, 2008, that allowed basically processes to run in isolation in terms of
namespacing.
Namespacing, exactly. Yeah. And that basically what Docker is about. It can run multiple processes on the same kernel, so the kernel is shared. So, but you get the same isolation of virtual machines without the burden of running a different kernel for each. Which
burns through memory.
Exactly, which is basically, especially if you run microservices and small apps, then you would be using more memory to replicate the kernel of each operating system.
So Docker is basically a much less resource-hungry virtualization technology. And yeah, Kubernetes then just orchestrates. So actually Kubernetes is probably very, very similar or is analogous to ESX. You know, the
ECS.
ESX, the VMware, the VMware virtualization orchestration platform. It's a little bit better, I think.
I think so.
Maybe quite a lot better.
I mean, and Kubernetes is not the first, at least I think historically, it's not the first container orchestrator. It's certainly the one that's that got more traction, more feature, it's more adopted, but there was Docker Swarm, I think it was the...
Docker Swarm was after.
It was after.
But then it kind of, yeah, I think Kubernetes is now like 4 years ago, and they started Docker Swarm 3 years ago, tried to compete with Kubernetes and then gave up.
That's sorry.
Yeah.
And what about ECS? More or less.
Oh, the Amazon Elastic Container Service.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of happened. We use
ECS, right?
Or you were using it up until
this week. Yeah, we were using ECS.
That was. Sorry, carry on, Tara.
I was going to say, we have quite a few follow-up questions in the chat. If you'd like to take a look in the chat, but I can also relay some of those. I just want to make sure that we get to all of them. So first is a question on whether if Codefresh integrates with Docker. Yes, everything in Codefresh is a Docker image, actually. So it is built on Docker containers and deploying to Kubernetes. And then I have a question that came in just a while back. I want to make sure we get to on how we're managing auto scaling of pods, and to elaborate how you're doing automatic scaling of the number of pods whenever the CPU utilization crosses the threshold mark. And this is from Yabesh.
Well, you basically just turn it on and it works.
Yeah, well, you need to deploy the pod as you deploy in the Codefresh pipeline. You deploy multiple Kubernetes reserves. So you can deploy services, deployments, namespaces, and along with those, you deploy now a pod auto-scaling policy, and that will do it, right? It's Kubernetes' responsibility to do that. You don't need to do that. You just need to deploy a policy that will say when when a pod in this deployment goes above 50% memory utilization, I want to spin up another pod. Or where my CPU goes below a certain utilization, I wanna kill one of the pods in my deployment.
Yeah, it works out the box and it's great.
Yeah, Yabesh says that they're using HPA auto scaling, but let's see. But how can we do that based upon using calls per second?
Calls per second?
That's a good question. So I'll try to answer, but I'm not sure that's the right answer. I think. It is still in beta in Kubernetes. The possibility to publish custom metrics and to use them in horizontal pod auto scaling policy. Maybe Matteo, you know that? It is possible. I think it's still in beta. For now, the default metrics are CPU and memory, but very soon you will be able to publish other metrics and to use that in.
I don't know why you would though.
I think you can. There are systems based on Prometheus.
Yeah, it's Prometheus, and it isn't.
They suggest to use Prometheus.
But I think the support is still in beta in the results version.
And scaling on custom metrics.
Scaling on custom metrics is still in beta.
I've never seen that in the wild. I've never seen anybody. No, I've never seen anybody do that though. I'm not sure why you would do that. I guess if you definitely knew what your calls would be consuming, then maybe you would. Maybe it would be a fancy trick to do at parties, maybe. Next question.
Yes, so how, Charlie asked how to integrate with Helm, Charts, Chart Museum, and Tiller if this was, oh, sorry, that is the full question. How do we integrate with Helm, Charts, Chart Museum, and Tiller?
Okay, so Helm is directly supported by Codefresh, but I'm very anti-Helm. I don't like Helm. I won't. So Helm is very, very useful when you're. For my opinion, is Helm is incredibly useful when you want to distribute your software somewhere else. Okay, so Helm is used as a way of delivering things like MySQL or Prometheus or the Nginx ingress controller, for instance. This is very, very useful. But for me personally, I don't like it, and we haven't used Helm. In this process?
No, I mean, we here at Credimi, we use it for example, if you want to deploy a Kafka cluster in a namespace, then that's why we use that. We consume charts.
Yep.
But for a software company who's not distributing their software, they're just running as a service, I don't see why you would run chart to deploy your own software.
It's just an extra layer of complexity that you have to deal with. It's just another abstraction layer. It doesn't make any sense. But if you are distributing software, then Codefresh does have very, very strong support for Helm. And I'm not sure about, what's the name? There was, I mean, Tiller's being removed now anyway. Tiller's being removed in the latest version of Helm. So there is no more Tiller. I think. Is that true?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Till is being sunsetted for Helm. And what was the Taryn, what did you say? Was it Helm Archive?
Actually, Chart Museum.
Chart Museum. I've never heard of Chart Museum.
Me neither.
No.
So Chart Museum is another open source repository, and we have very thorough support for Chart Museum. So Charlie, I would love to reach out to you directly, and we can elaborate more if you're using Helm and Chart Museum, exactly what Codefresh can offer for you.
But don't come and talk to me.
My next question is from Owen. We have, do you recommend developers running Kubernetes locally?
Yeah, why not? I mean, you can do. If you don't have access to a cluster, Minikube is really, really cool.
I think we also use micro Kubernetes. And why? What's the reason for using micro Kubernetes?
Because it doesn't spawn a VM on Linux system.
Ah, okay. So it just runs on the native Linux system.
Yeah.
So yeah, Minikube and micro Kubernetes are really, really cool systems. They don't cost anything to consume. They're really, really good sandboxes. It's just when you start, if you're just learning Kubernetes and you're just deploying one or two processes, then it's awesome. But if you're trying to deploy a complex microservices architecture onto your Minikube, your laptop might go on fire. And I think that's but it's actually, most of the major cloud providers, well, at least Google Cloud is providing free resources. And you can actually run a Kubernetes cluster in the cloud for under $50 a month. And that's what I recommend. It's much easier, but I've never actually run Minikube. I've just consumed it from the cloud. But I know people who do.
I ran Minikube when I was learning Kubernetes to try the CLI, right? To see what happened when you, when you have no Wi-Fi and no network and you're just playing.
I had a baptism of fire with Kubernetes where I just had to do it, and I didn't have the benefit of the learning curve. Next question.
Okay, we're going to dial it back just a little bit. So just want to, the question is, what is the point of going deep into container technology while talking about DevOps?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Sure. What is the point of going deep into container technology while talking about DevOps?
What's the point of going deep into container technology while talking about DevOps?
Well, to save money in DevOps, right? I think at least that's my view. If you have, it's a big value for a company not to have to care about separate environment and building every piece of software on a different stack. Complexity costs money, and Docker saves you money. Yeah. And I guess this is good value for every company.
Maybe is it possible to get a clarification on what that question means? It's a bit.
Dr. Hamley, if you'd want to post anything, there he goes. He says, not all people are using containers. So again, what is the point of going deep into container technology?
Oh, I see what you mean. Well, I mean, as a company, okay, so I'm here to pitch my company, okay? And as a company, we would not support any client to build any infrastructure that wasn't based on Kubernetes right now. It wouldn't make any sense. It would take too long. So the point is that Kubernetes and Docker enables us to deliver to, for instance, to Credemy, a brand new infrastructure, really advanced infrastructure in a week. And when I was working as a DevOps engineer before Kubernetes, before Docker, to do the same value delivery would take me months. In fact, I would never, ever get anywhere close to the level of what we've done this week. So the point is that my belief is that DevOps as a role is done, because all of the ops have been devved, and Kubernetes and Docker have basically, Kubernetes is basically the embodiment of all that is DevOps, because it's kind of the pinnacle of the pinnacle of the art, let's say. There's nothing left to do with it. Does that answer the question?
Yep, I'll wait for his reply on chat there. And I have one more question. As we move more and more towards containers in Kubernetes, where does that leave hypervisor technologies and VMs? And this is from Scott.
I think it screws them.
Well,
you've got some legacy applications that need to be run, I guess. I mean, hypervisor technology is always going to be incredibly important to the cloud. Maybe. I mean, if you've got like a pure Kubernetes cloud provider, But if you look at Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud, Kubernetes it's all deployed into virtual machines. So I think hypervisor technology will always have a home in the cloud providers. In terms of in the enterprise, I mean, if you're still running your, what's it called? I forgot the name. What's the name of the, like, Exchange? If you're still running an Exchange server, you probably want to virtualize it. I think VMware is really feeling the heat. I think, have they gone bust yet? Or?
Well, certainly what's happening with Kubernetes, what started to happen with cloud providers, with cloud offering. And what's certainly happening with Kubernetes is that developers are working at a higher abstraction level. Mm-hmm. And there's no reason to go back and write assembler unless you really need to. And I see the case for people who are providing infrastructure service and they have special requirements, but I would say 98% of the company in the world, they can probably run Docker containers mm-hmm. on a Kubernetes cluster, and they might not even know where physically this cluster is run, and they might not even care.
Yeah, why do they care? I mean, maybe there's some data sovereignty things happening.
Right, these are the cases, but then you can solve that, you know, by using databases that are located, by making your state persistent only where you're allowed to.
Yeah.
But everything else, where data is transient, can run everywhere.
So I think, I mean, I used to be a hardcore systems engineer, a virtualization engineer, and stuff like that. And I just stopped getting work doing that kind of thing. I used to be a hardcore storage, hardcore networking engineer. I used to be deep into the Linux kernel doing KVM stuff, the Linux virtualization, and all of the work just dried up. Nobody wanted to touch it anymore. And I haven't done any of that kind of work in, I don't know, 7-8 years, maybe. Long time. So I mean, all of the and actually as a DevOps engineer, that work is now drying up as well. And so yeah, let's put it like this. So let's say that my value as a storage and network engineer was kind of made redundant by Amazon Web Services. My knowledge of storage, networking, and virtualization was made redundant by Amazon Web Services, and now my knowledge of Amazon Web Services has been made completely redundant by Kubernetes. And so it's like, it's like I'm constantly running from from being redundant and this is the case as a system engineer. It's actually really tough. And yeah, but yeah. Any more? What's the next question?
All right. So first of all, I want to make sure that everyone knows I have a question about how we can get more information about the cost of Codefresh and of Otter Networks. I want to remind everyone that Codefresh has a free account for 120 builds a month. So please go on codefresh.io and sign up for your free account to give us a try. And thank you to Andrew and to Edmondo very much for this presentation. We really appreciate it. And we hope you'll join us on our next Codefresh live event. Please check out codefresh.io/events and you can see all of our upcoming webinars.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.